Bam.
This is Michael Stockham, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. I love talking to authors. I write a little bit. I wouldn't say that I'm an author, but I write enough to be able to say, hey, you know what? It's really neat that we get to do these things. And I appreciate the heck out of you for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And talking about your book. Yeah, it's when you look back at the beginnings of being an author, and trying to decide, like, can I really do this? What, I guess before that, what pushed you over the edge where I have to do it became the answer?
So the current set of books, or the two books that I've published, are really sort of came out of COVID. I ended up with some pretty significant insomnia for several years. So I was looking for something to do to keep myself busy. So it was born out of necessity, but most of the desire to write has come from sort of a lifelong passion, if you will. Something that I've pursued for a very long time.
Yeah. When you go to a Barnes and Noble, whatever, like a big one, you look around like, oh my God, why even bother? Right? Like it's daunting to think about putting a book together, but at some point you get over. Some people get over it early. Some people it takes a little while later. You've got the insomnia thing, but when you see the market itself, there's really no need for any books ever, right? Like there are just so many books that we are never going to read that are incredible already.
That's true. So I think that if you were to believe that in your heart, right, that there are that many books, and that why is it worth it to even try to put my story out, you'd never get started. You never really get started on the project whatsoever. But when you turn around and decide that you're really going to do it and start writing the story, then once you fall in love with it, you really want other people to read it, want to participate in it.
Yeah. And how obnoxious are you at parties about your book? Oh, I wrote a book. You got to read it.
No, I try to be pretty humble. I think a lot of people sort of, the myth is that authors are always bragging about what they've done, or, sort of always giving advice or trying to do it. I've always been sort of a little bit shy about it, oddly enough. I mean, it is an incredibly large project to undertake and complete, but I don't really jump out and start bragging about it right away to people. People sort of find me and then ask questions. That usually morphs into a pretty good conversation, and I'm always willing to talk to somebody about the process or talk about writing the books. I really don't want to foist it on people. I hold back a little bit.
The style of writing that you do professionally is rather different than the style that you would do here with your novel. Did you struggle with that much?
A little bit. So let me give you a little bit of my background just to sort of tell you where some of the desire for writing comes from.
Sure.
I originally was not supposed to be a lawyer. In fact, my first degree was in writing poetry from the University of New Mexico. And I, I graduated with that degree, and then ultimately went and was a fly fishing guide for a few months, etc., up in Navajo Dam, New Mexico. From there, I went to A&M and got a second degree in writing short stories. So I doubled up on degrees that I couldn't feed myself with, which was probably in retrospect not the best thing. Right. Then I ambled around for a few years and then went to law school. So it was a bit of a transition for me, going from a fiction writer or a creative writer into learning how to write for the law. And then after that, come back out and get back into fiction writing, storytelling. It's not completely different, if you will, because I'm a trial lawyer. And so the concept of persuasion to trials, juries, regular people, anybody that you're talking to really is storytelling. I'm just bound a little bit more by legal precedent, or actually the record that I have around me. But the storytelling is still a key component, still a very key component.
Is that true? Is that true in all forms of law? Like for example, there's a lawyer for space, like outer space, right? And there's legal precedents that have to be interpreted and applied. Is that person still a storyteller?
I think so, in a way, because they're trying to tell their client's best story, put the best foot forward. So even in a transaction, when you're trying to negotiate a deal or do a transaction, I think those people are storytellers in their own right. They have a structure that goes to a transaction. They have a cadence that goes to a transaction, a timeline. Both sides are trying to get the best deal for their person. And that ultimately boils down to persuasion again, and persuasion is storytelling.
There are some lawyers that are like they have a mastery of the written language. I think Clarence Thomas is noted for his commanding, even when he writes a dissent. And this is not a political statement. It's just everybody knows that when he writes something, good gracious, it is well written. But he's not loquacious at all, right? And so how do you determine which kind of lawyer you are? Are you like a blend of these things? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of people, sort of the myth is that law is all about legalese and whereases and heretofores and other complicated language. Since I've been a lawyer in the last 20 years, there's been a huge, huge push for what they call plain language law, where people are to write in the most simple format they can in order to convey the message, the precedent, etc. And that's been a real change in the past few decades, couple or so. And my grandfather was actually on the Supreme Court of Kansas back in the 60s and 70s. And sometimes I'll sit down and read his opinions. And they're a lot more loquacious and big worded than the stuff that I do. But I think the focus more and more presently, is for people to try to communicate cleanly, crisply, and get their point across in the shortest form possible. And I think that's what you see with people like Clarence Thomas and others that have spent a lifetime trying to distill complex theories into simple thoughts.
Let's just stay right here for a second, because we brought up Clarence Thomas. If we were to read Justice Jackson's decisions, they're a completely different style. She's not citing case law, and she's really trying to cite norms in society, right? And that's how she uses her judgeship, and both legitimate ways to do it, but very different styles of writing. It's really, when you read, I don't read that many Supreme Court, but I do read them. And oftentimes I'm like, I don't know what that means, and I got to go find someone else to teach me real quick what something means. But you can read these things, and they're compelling in both sides. It's like, I don't know, how do you pick between the two of them? So it is amazing to see different styles and modes when it comes to convincing someone on, applying a law that was written in the 60s to modern day times, and is it still relevant? And you got some side saying yes, some side saying no, and then the politics in there. Oh my gosh, that becomes really confusing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And each judge picks up their own style. Each lawyer picks up their own style, how they want to be, what they find persuasive, what they find, how their theories are, and in the law, how they want to advance those theories. If some people say activist judges and others, but almost all judges are born of some sort of history, just like any human being. They're going to have their experiences. They're going to have what they've done in the past in the law, and that's going to inform their judgment of how they apply it. And then, it breaks down into school of thought. So you have some judges like Clarence Thomas and other that folks will call originalists, and are claim to be very text-based, and oftentimes very are. And then you have others like Justice Jackson, who does want to look outside just the text and try to apply it as best she can to current circumstances. So very different philosophies, both very accomplished individuals, and both trying to do the best they can to persuade and tell a story to get people to come to their side.
It's funny when you hear people talk about the Supreme Court, they'll make an assumption about what way something's going to go. And, like, because they're this and everything else. And then it goes, 9-0 in the direction it favors what they wanted to have happen. They never seem to remember those wins, right? But we do seem to remember the losses more. What is it about the law that causes us to remember these negative things more than the fact that, hey, they went 9-0 in this direction?
I think that's a sort of a universal concept in a way. All of us remember our losses a lot more than our wins for some reason. Maybe that's just human nature. But the losses, especially in trial law is a big gamble. It's a 50-50 shot in front of 12 of your peers. And so you do remember the losses. They hurt. That's the easy way to say it. All losses hurt. You try to turn those around into experience and judgment and learn from them. And you learn a lot more from your losses than you do from your wins. Maybe because you just kind of gloss over it and move a little faster. You get caught up in the excitement and you don't go back to critique it as much. There's a somewhat of a quip that every lawyer's best cross-examination is on the way home in his car. What I could have said, how I could have said it better, what I would have done differently. And you do that a lot more, I can tell you, when you lose than you do when you win.
That makes a lot of sense. So you've written this book, and I want to talk about that, The Ties That Bind. And I love a turn of phrase, right? You've got this ties that bind. And actually, that's how I wrote it at first. You might even see the air out there because I got my cataract. So I'm like, can I type blind or not? I got cataract surgery this week, but there's sometimes a letter will disappear off. It's really crazy. Anyhow, I love a turn of phrase. And I love to look at all the ways you might turn a phrase. Like if you took the ties that blind, clever, right? And then if you flipped it around again and said blinding the ties that would, you can do this indefinitely. Are you a big fan of these turns of phrases that we know so well? You give us a different perspective.
When I went out to look for a title for the book, I was looking for something that fit the text, but also was a turn of phrase, something that would be somewhat catchy. So there's really three. We're starting a series of 9 books, and we've got 3 that we've planned out so far. One is written and published, one is currently in the outline form, and then the second is conceptual. And that's Ties That Bind, Don't Forsake Me, and then the last one is called The Rest of the Wicked, which is also a turn on instead of No Rest for the Wicked. So I do enjoy it. Maybe that goes back to the original concepts I had when I was doing more involved in poetry, in turn of phrase, and in trying to distill things down into very, very short bites to try to give someone an image or try to give somebody something to be curious about.
Yeah, love it. One of my favorite ones that I've come up with is the fated twist instead of a twist of fate.
Oh,
and the fated.
Very nice.
Yeah, apocalypto at the end when the Spaniards show up on the horizon. You're like, oh shit, that's right. None of this matters. It's all like it's the ultimate. And I don't know if it's crueler or not. Like this fated twist that there was nothing you could have done externally. You wouldn't have ever even known this thing was going to happen, but it changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so when you do this, are you looking at Grisham for ideas and designs? Who do you look at and say, this is sort of, and look, you don't got to be, you can be inspired by, and you can even be like a step further in that, where like, an homage to whatever Grisham, whoever it's going to be. But I mean, we have to start there, right, with Grisham.
So he made, in a lot of ways, he's sort of the father, if you will, of the legal thriller. There's another gentleman that came by, probably a little bit before him, Scott Turow. Scott Turow wrote 1L, which ultimately became The Paper Chase as the movie, his first year of law school at Harvard. And then from there, he went on to write legal thrillers as well. So to a certain extent, I think Grisham plowed ahead and people really started to learn from novels, et cetera, that they liked this genre. They liked the idea of the legal thriller, somebody at jeopardy, the clash of the law. And he really popularized it and has become just phenomenally large. He's just bigger, larger than life. Scott Turow is, also somewhat larger than life in a lot of circles, and someone that I admire because he's done the same thing. He's been a big firm partner for all of his career, so 30 or 35 years or more. But he's also been able to keep up his desire to write novels and keep it on a dual track, which I think is very helpful. It's very inspiring to see that.
Do you think it informs his practice?
I don't see how it can't inform the practice. Not necessarily that you learn more precedent or you become a better lawyer, but I think you start to learn how to write even better when you're spending your time outside of legal writing into a different genre, and you're really trying to concentrate on every word or turn of phrase to create an image. That starts to leak into how you communicate, how you write, and also just sort of day-to-day how you analyze problems, because you start to look at details and facts differently. You even start to look at motivations of people differently, because it's an adversarial process, the law. And so trying to figure out what the person across the table really wants from you is important.
Sometimes that person across the table, if you're a big city lawyer, you know these people, is the judge that you have to write for. And even if your personalities align, if you realize that this person hates heretofores and where-ins, you're writing for a different audience, or maybe not. I don't know. You're the lawyer. You tell me.
Well, every judge that I've come across really is looking to resolve the dispute. And they almost always want to get it right. They want to get to the right answer. Most judges, in fact, almost all of them I've ever been in front of, I thought didn't really have an agenda. They wanted to get to the right answer and move their docket. And so anything you can do, anything to make it clear, to make it succinct, to let them understand what the kernel of the issue is very quickly is very much appreciated by those on the bench. Because quite honestly, they have such overloaded dockets with so many cases and so much to do in a day that they don't really have time to sit down and pore over your briefs that you lovingly wrote, et cetera. You have to be crisp and clean and get the point across.
Yeah, it's boy, right? Crisp and clean and getting the point across, right? And defending someone. I have an author coming up. I believe we're going to do this thing, but he's the guy. He wrote a breakdown of this multi-murder case in Idaho. I don't even want to say the guy's name because I'm not trying to change the point of this in your book. But he's looking at the guy representing this person. I don't know if you recall, these students were killed with a knife.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was some DNA, and apparently it's touch DNA on the knife case, right? But there's no blood. There's nothing else. They dismantled the alleged killer's car. There's blood, so much blood at the scene that it seeps into the foundations and out of the house. I mean, it's crazy how much evidence that there is.
Yeah.
But only this one little speck of DNA matches who the killer. Now, I'm not saying he did or didn't do it, but his lawyers are making a very, very powerful, this case is no longer as cut and dried as we thought when you look at triangulation and all those other things. But if you really did it and you're that person's lawyer, gosh, I mean, they deserve a defense, right? But this is the ultimate conundrum of. So, and here's one thing the FBI supposedly did. We'll see what happens when they get the court meeting decided. The FBI accessed private databases they're going to be able to access. And, oh man, if they did that, if this guy did it and he gets off on this technicality, whoa, are you a good lawyer? Are you a great lawyer? Or how do you live with yourself?
It is a conundrum for everybody that practices law. One of the most important parts, though, is that you really do sort of ethically and as part of the profession sign up to defend or advance your client's interests zealously within the rules. And those rules allow wide latitude. So it's really an amazing component of our society, our constitution, of our fabric as a nation, that due process is taken so seriously. And you will have lawyers that are very, very strong advocates for people that the court of public opinion or the news has already condemned as a monster, but the lawyer will walk in and dispassionately or passionately advocate for that client, and they will use every tool they can to try to defend them, especially in a murder trial. So it is a conundrum to a certain extent. It really is what you are at the core as an advocate, to take care of your client when you sign up that client to defend them.
Yeah, and when you, I'll do quoted fingers, lose, oftentimes that client belongs to you for the rest of your life, because just because they lost doesn't mean that they've lost forever, right? And you go in and then you start appealing and try to change things. And even if it means you're not getting paid, gosh, it's crazy. And the other side of this is, if I was accused of something and turned into a monster, and if I hadn't done that thing, gosh, I would want someone to defend me just as zealously, right? So we all want that courage and that battle, but we don't want to deny it to somebody else either.
No, I think that's right. I think you're absolutely 100% right. And there are, unfortunately, a number of instances of wrongful convictions of people coming off of even death row after 30 years where DNA evidence has cleared them, et cetera. So
Right.
you really do need to have a strong advocate, and that's what you train to be as a lawyer.
What kind of lawyer is Jake Fox? He's your character in your thriller novels.
So I set him up as a criminal defense lawyer that was sort of at the heights of his prowess in Dallas, in part of the criminal defense bar. For a number of different reasons, his life falls apart and he moves back to his hometown of Haven. And so he goes from criminal defense to sort of more small town law, and then gets sucked up in this particular murder defense for a young lady accused, or a teenager accused of murdering her father.
And is he? Does he have interests outside of the law, or is the law his hobby as well? Because that's very common for lawyers, where that's their prime thing.
Well, I think mostly in the first book, when we first meet him, his interest isn't so much other hobbies or distractions, other than the fact that he's somewhat running. He's trying to heal one from tragedies in his own life. And so he's trying to kind of put himself back together is really what he's doing when we meet him. And then the events of the story take over quickly. So there's really some outside activities, but mostly it focuses on the main problems in the story itself in the novel.
How much of Jake Fox is Michael Stockham?
That's always a good question, right? So I've written 2 books. The first one, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, was inspired by true events. Me representing as a prisoner in solitary confinement in a civil rights case about 20 years ago. And then this one, I just sort of broke free a little bit to stay away from inspired by true events, to try not put so much of myself in it, other than experience and knowing how to figure out certain aspects of the law and understand how to explain that to people.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is when you write something that's inspired by true events, it's both cathartic and it can shackle you, because you want it to be as honest as possible, or true as possible, accurate. When you're out in the world of just pure fiction, then you get to play with the characters and the activities all you want.
Yeah. One of my friends is a lawyer. He's doesn't matter what kind of practice, but it's very intimate, family-based style practice. And he got sued about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, and it was ridiculous. And the whole thing was it really affected him, because when he got into law, he didn't want to be a lawyer. He wanted to be an advocate for people.
Right.
And his practice reflects that, right? And so when he got sued, it really hurt him, because he's very, very good at his job. And he's like, the thing that I learned, he's like, first off, all of my friends in my field said, "Oh, you're only just now getting sued when you're 50-something years old? Where you been?" And the other thing you said was, and this just struck me as interesting, when you take your notes, you're taking these notes not for you to remember so you do a better job. Of course, that's part of it, but you do it in case you're sued. And the kind of advice that you give is to also avoid problems in these lawsuits. Because even if your advice is sound all the time, you're having to write your notes in a different way. And I say all this because I know of a story here in California where a guy and his lawyer had impeccable records. They had the receipts from everybody. And when things got crazy, his lawyer was able to, let me read this from the top here. "You said this on this date on this phone call that I recorded. Do you recall that?" And they're like, "Yeah,
right.
Never mind." All right, no. And so that note-taking thing, it's amazing when you realize how powerful that can be when things start to get a little squirrely. When you got underground and you got, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy kind of stuff, especially in novels, right? Where you can take these real life things and add in a voicemail that's saved or whatever it is. Boy, that's a powerful story device.
That is one of the beauties of being unshackled from inspired by true events, is if you need to add something, you can add it. Absolutely. So that gets to be more playful and more fun, and you really enjoy that. On the note-taking item, the number one reason that lawyers get sued is the client doesn't feel like they were communicated enough. often enough or with enough detail, or they didn't understand. So part of being a lawyer is also communication and constantly keeping your client up to date as to what the strategic choices are and inviting the client in on those, so that you're not practicing law on a client, you're practicing law for and with the client. And that's a very important component,
Yeah, there's so many components in the law, and that sounds like a ridiculously obvious statement, but are you a procedural lawyer? Are you the kind of lawyer that teaches people about taking better notes? Because if you're a solo practitioner, you wear all those hats, right? And so you might have to hire out. Like, I got to go to Michael to find out how the hell to take better notes or whatever it is, right? Because there are all these different avenues. A friend of mine does law. It's all remotely now, basically, and he just writes appeals, and he writes the fuck out of them. And so he gets a lot of business. He didn't know that was going to be what he did. He had a big ad. He took out all the, he made a bunch of money. He's like, that was too running around. I didn't want to do all that. I want to sit down. I want to write an appeal. I want to get out of the way and go live my life. That's what he wants to do. And he's built a pretty successful business doing that one thing. He cut a lot of the extra stuff out of there, but he had to make a name for himself first.
Well, when you go to law school, they train you on appellate opinions. So you read opinions out of the case books all the time. And a number of lawyers, I would say a high percentage of lawyers coming out of law school want to be appellate lawyers. They want to sit down and they want to write the appellate brief, or they want to be able to sort of live in that research-based type activity. And then the real practice of law, and I don't mean that appellate law isn't real, but the day-to-day practice of what actually happens in the law, there's such a larger percentage of it than appeals, that you kind of break out of that. And then you find your own sort of pathway. Everybody comes up with a niche. And there are a lot of folks that turn back towards, once they've had a lot of experience in the law and practice for a while, then they start building that niche towards becoming an appellate lawyer. And they're amazing. The folks that write the appeals for us, or we pull them oftentimes in, appellate lawyers, to write briefs, even down in the trial court, because they're such excellent writers. They're such great craftspeople. And you really want someone like that to be working with you when you advance things in court.
Yeah. It's the art of the amicus brief. Like, that's just an amazing thing to provide that on behalf of your client, potentially. You're like, hey, look at this. Here's this legal brief. And it's a person who is, it must be that they almost self-select into that particular field, where they discover that, okay, yeah, not only am I a good writer, I'm a great writer, especially of law and especially of this. Why don't I do this? And then like you said, you find that niche, and it's just comfortable, because it can't be easy work. It's got to still be very deliberate, hard work.
It's very difficult work, because a number of not most of the time, or a large percentage of the time, the appellate lawyer won't really have seen what went on in the hearing or see what went on at the trial. They're piecing it back together from dealing on a record and what people are telling them about what happened. And then they're piecing back through the record to see whether or not error was actually preserved and whether there's something they can take up on appeal. They're very impressive technicians when it comes to that. And then how they distill all of that down into 25 pages or 50 pages, whatever the limit is for the particular court, as to how they're going to say what error was significant enough that the judges on the bench above, that the appellate court, should reverse the trial court down below. And that's a real art, a real science. And in the expertise that comes from practicing law in trial court or doing things other than just appellate law, I think really informs those folks. They really take their judgment, and they become very, very excellent when they have all that extra practical experience to bring to bear on when they write those appeals.
When you're a judge and the next, appellate briefing or amicus briefing comes in and it's from Michael Stockham, you're like, oh, I'm about to have my mind changed. You just know like the authorship of someone, and like, oh, here we go, because you wouldn't write something. My buddy wouldn't write something if they didn't like, oh yeah, I can make this work. Right.
Very much so. You're 100% correct. There are almost celebrities in the appellate bars around. There are people that are widely known within a specific jurisdiction or nationally or otherwise, that they are really preeminent appellate lawyers. Yeah. And they're amazing individuals. They've earned all of their reputation. They've earned all of their success because it's really hard work, especially as we tie, if you tie it back to the idea of story and what we were talking about early, they're really trying to distill something enormous into very clear, concise, crisp arguments while also engaging the court to engage with their brief, engage with their client, and really see their point of view. Very difficult task.
Yeah. Your writing career, let me ask you this. When you go to a party, do you say, "Oh, I'm a lawyer that also writes books"? Do you even bring the books up? Or what do you say you do?
Well, I say I'm an attorney. And if the conversation goes a little bit further, people ask what you do in your free time or in general conversation. Most people will give you some sort of entree into talking about what you're doing with the books and other things. And they find it interesting. A lot of people I find actually introduce the writing for me. Friends and other people will mention that I've been writing novels or publishing novels. And so it just becomes very organic. I've found. I mean, maybe it'll change in time or something different, but right now it's been pretty organic and there's pretty natural segues into just conversations about it. And everybody has a different question. Some people want to know about how I do it, when I do it, sort of the process of it. Some people want to know how I got around to being a lawyer. Being a lawyer and then an author. And some people just want to engage in the stories. They want to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always a lot to cover with that. And then when you think about how great your friends are, to take that lift off of you, like, oh my gosh, Michael's a brilliant lawyer. He's also an incredible writer, right? And you should read his book. Matter of fact, here's a copy, and they give him a copy. I mean, that's what you want from your friends, right? To take that self-serving thing from you. It's one of my jobs, right? Is to talk about like how great someone is, so that you don't have to do it. Like, you could never say whatever. Let me say it for you, and then you say it for him. What a great group of friends to have them say, "Hey, this is something he's not going to tell you about, but he's written these 2 novels, has a 3rd on the way, has another one in development, and you got to get on board now." It's like Sue Grafton when she was on B, and you got in early. That's the kind of thing that you want to have someone say. Which is, by the way, I'm saying to you guys for real.
No, you're right. You're 100% right. And that makes a big difference. That makes a big difference for people to take that off your shoulder. And, part of friendship is making sure that you take it off other people's shoulders, that you brag on them, point out what they're great at, what they really do.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a different kind of business. Obviously, you work at a big law firm. If you want to move up, it helps if you can bring business in and kind of pay your own bill and bring some extra gravy in for the practice. The same is true for writing a book, right? You have to be salesman of the year every year for Stockham books, right? How are you doing at learning that craft and perfecting it?
The same way I learn how to do everything else, one step at a time. And I can tell you there are just so many different learning curves to all of this new activity, if you will, or anything that this whole publishing thing is really different, setting up your own press. So it's been a lot of different learning curves. You seek out a lot of different mentors. You work very hard at trying to learn anywhere you can. And one step at a time, it seems to get easier. Every time you do something a second time, it's a lot easier. So just have to keep moving, I guess.
I've had a lot of authors on my show, and we've been around for 10 years. And the next author that says, someone heard the show that we did in 2016 and bought a book, or whatever it is, or I wrote this book, I thought it ended up being a dud, and then because of some podcast mine, somebody else's, it rocketed up, and all of a sudden I sold 80,000 of them. I didn't even expect it. I thought that book was done. That happens, I will say, all the time, where something happens, it becomes relevant again, or whatever it is, and then like a rocket, there goes that book. And even if it's like a rocket, like a 10-year-old book sells 2,000 copies,
right?
That's all your money.
Yeah. Flow through reading or something coming back. You really can't discount the power of serendipity in your life. Things just happen. And if you stay open to it long enough, if you work hard enough, if you stay true to your vision and try to keep plowing forward, serendipity can play an amazing role in making stuff suddenly happen. That's absolutely
Yeah.
true.
It doesn't have to be book sales either. This is the thing I've learned through the podcast. Look, I'm not famous, so I'm fighting against a lot of famous people now in terms of attention for podcasting.
Right.
But because I reliably do like bang on that hammer all day long and put out podcasts, people come to me and they're like, I have a project, but what I don't have is production capability. And they worry about little precious thing like, what machine should I buy? And I'm like, no. It's all about, can you reliably show up at the office every day and do one small thing, those small steps for writing a book, right? And so that's where a lot of my success comes, is like, I know a lot about what to do and what not to do in making a podcast.
Well, I think, I've been a firm believer in this is sort of a metaphor I've used a lot in life, is the power of water. Especially maybe I learned it while I was running around so many rivers fishing all the time.
Yeah.
But when you look at how a stream is built, or even how a waterfall is carved, or if you just put drip after drip after drip of water on a rock, it can over time drill a hole through that rock. So it's really persistence more than anything that will ultimately accomplish a goal. That's really what it is, little by little.
What do you think about this? You don't get to choose where those drips end up pushing that hole through that rock. It might go and turn and come out the side. It's just the work will get you the result, but you can't reliably and repeatedly know the result you're going to get. So I might start this and think, if I can get 100,000 people to pay attention to my show and I'll use my Amazon link, or 1%, then I'll make X, right? And that's what I'm going to go for. End up anywhere near there. And the place I've ended up is, the value in what I do is this. I get to know you. I get to know other authors. I get to know athletes and soldiers and all kinds of people. And my network has become this powerfully dense thing where I can say, oh, you know what? I know a guy like that. And all of a sudden,
a huge benefit.
And I didn't know that was going to happen. Right.
You have no idea who is going to come back in life and suddenly show up that's going to give you an incredible boost, or something you said a long time ago actually impacted somebody and they come back and tell you about it. You really don't get to choose.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. If you're reliable, if you show up, if you keep moving a little bit every day, then over time you can make a lot of progress. That's absolutely truth.
Yeah. And if you allow that to be a good thing, and if you find the value in a good network, in a good introduction, in providing 5 minutes of counsel on something, I'm not talking about legal counsel, just like, look, if you're going to have a podcast, anything, all of a sudden there's value there. And that exchange of value, it's just a little seed planted, right? We're going to spend an hour chatting here. And that's a thing. You could also go do a Barnes & Noble book tour and go sit in those places and either have a good day, bad day, great day, whatever. But if you keep doing that and you keep building up those markets, all of a sudden you have all of these other results. It doesn't have to equal book sales. It'd be great if it does. But if it equaled a lot of wealth and happiness and some other things, boy, hard to replace that.
I agree with that. I think one of the most rewarding aspects of seed planting I've ever had is as a father. It is really something to accidentally or just come upon your daughter speaking to one of her friends out on the porch or something else, and something you told her 4 or 5 years ago, some little mentoring kernel that you put in her ear, she's now counseling that other kid with. That is really powerful. When you think that something that you said that was just a whisper at the time that seemed to just float away and disappear and you didn't understand it had an impact has now come full circle, and your kid is using it to impact somebody else positively. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I get that quite often, not because of the show necessarily, but just in life in general. Because I write a little bit and think about these things, someone will quite often say, you said something to me. And then my first thought is, oh, fuck, what did I say? And then they always say something and this stuck with me. And I'm like, all right, I have a knack for that, apparently. I should keep running my yap, because you don't know. But yeah, it's neat. I talk to high school kids from my high school, my buddy's high school now too. I do 2 schools, two semesters every year. So not a whole lot of it. And I'm not trying to do that for a living, but I do try to show up. And these are mostly seniors from my high school, right? And I'm like, hey, I'm you from the future. And I grew up in this town like you did. What do you want to ask me? And I say a lot of things like, take some pressure off yourself. You're way better looking than you think you are. You're going to have a great time. Stuff's going to suck, but look, here I am. All kinds of bad things have happened, but here, and so I try to provide that. And I don't even care if anyone ever comes back to me and says you made a difference. And some people have, but that's not the point. The point is here's some seeds. I'm going to cast them out. I'm going to give you my best advice. And sometimes it's your dumb Uncle Pete advice, right? But that's advice, So, yeah.
Well, I mean, any sort of help is always, anything that if you can impact somebody else, or if you might have a kind word or a way to make somebody's life easier in a moment, that's really can be powerful. And that's, loop it back to the law. That's one of the things people, I don't think, truly understand about lawyers, because when you sign up to be a lawyer, you sign up to be attorney and counselor. And it's not like therapist, but almost everybody, especially on the defense side, whether it's civil or criminal or it's particularly relevant in family law, but almost everybody's going through a period of their life that is one of the worst things to ever happen to them. They're under stress. It's financially difficult. People are accusing them of things. And so you really have to turn on some skills to help and communicate and guide that person through the legal process. It's not just all technical, procedural. There's a lot of humanness in it too.
Oh. Is your character, is he a good friend? Is he a good soulmate? Or is he bound up by his work and his life that he struggles with those kind of things? I mean, obviously his life is going through a very tumultuous time. I don't want people to come read these books, so let's not get too far into the story, but let's talk a little bit about the nature of that person, the kind of counsel he might give to a friend or a kid on the porch.
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's kind of a common arc for lawyers. You can get caught up, especially younger, when you're building a practice and trying to grow in a practice. You can get lost and the law becomes everything. And you can forget about family, or forget about other relationships or other aspects of business to take care of. And so I think this character goes from that kind of beginning where he's wrapped up in just the law and his own career himself. Mm-hmm. Loses everything, and the story really does I think work on answering your question. Is he going to be a good friend? Can he be the right kind of person that the audience wants him to be? And the exciting part about doing it as a series is I don't have to resolve that all in the first book. That's something that can play out over a number of different books by putting him in different situations. And that's something I look forward to that really jazzes me about going on with the full series here.
Yeah. I love an in-betweenquel. It's the thing that you didn't know you needed to write that comes in, and it goes in between. F is for fugitive and G is for whatever. And you have that book in between that kind of shoots off. And it may not even be part of the series. It's in the universe, right? But it's not relevant to advancing that arc. I think these kind of little richness, I think that's a modern time thing where, like, maybe you make a podcast, an 8 episode, 8 hour arc. Like, this has nothing to do with that, but Jake's friend Larry, who runs this thing, whatever, Better Call Saul is kind of an in-betweenquel that kind of shoots off to the side, right? Less spin-off, more in-between things. And the moment 5 minutes before you enter the scene, or the moment 5 minutes after, where, here's a good example, and then I'm going to shut up. I know I'm talking a lot about this.
No, you're good.
When you're sitting on the plaintiff's side in the courthouse and you are in a lot of trouble, whether you've done something bad or not, and you see all the lawyers, they all know each other, and they're like yucking it up, and you're like, you're fucking serious, man. My shit's on the line here,
Oh yeah.
That's a good example of an in-betweenquel. Like, these guys work here. This is their work. My life is on the line, and you guys are fucking around. I need to this is a serious play, and then the court starts and everybody gets all serious. They take care of things. But, those moments I think are fascinating in the world of storytelling.
Absolutely. And that's a real world thing. And that the collegiality amongst the bar is very important. Even though there's animosity or antagonism because it's an adversarial process, the bar is not that big. I mean, there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lawyers, but when you finally get down into your practice, your niche, and what you do with your expertise, you're going to run across the same 250 people over and over again. So learning to be collegial, learning to figure out how to work those relationships, not in a bad way, not in a manipulative way, but the collegiality, the friendship can actually ultimately come back and help advance a client's interest. And sometimes that's hard to explain, especially at trial when everything is all fisticuffs and the bell's gone off and it's fights. The client doesn't want to see you making a joke with opposing counsel. They sometimes they bluster or bow up that's some sort of disloyalty. But that kind of friendship, that kind of collegiality can come back if you need something, some sort of a little bit of a give on some evidence or a little bit of a give on a position. Good relationships can help clients. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then in terms of storytelling, what do you think about those little holes, those little in-betwinkles that have power? What do you think about that concept?
I love it. It's absolutely true, because one of the greatest things when you write a story is to actually come in and have something pop up out of nowhere and make it important to the story. So maybe it's what you were talking at, something that is uniquely some sort of little vignette that is so real, so together, so poignant, that pops up in the middle of a story that you can put in there that makes it come to life that you never thought about. That's really interesting. I've seen a lot of series writers put out novellas to tell a story, to take just that little branch you said and spend a little bit of time to put something out to explore that, but not really deviate much from the, not have to take the whole series off the arc type of thing. Those are really amazing instances and opportunities.
I am writing something along those lines for it's a compendium of stories. They're going to be crime things, so maybe some noir will pop in there, those kind of things. And it's set in LA, and they're going to sell this thing and give the proceeds to to the folks who've suffered these fires. And I'm sort of playing with what. You're not going to get a lot of background on my character. There's just not room. I've got 8,000 words, it's a novella basically. And so there's a lot of these other moments. And so I'm sort of seeding the ground, but I still have to tell the story in 8,000 words. And so I'm trying to figure out the balance between background and interaction between these characters and what the audience needs to know versus what they get to know.
Oh, 100%. And that's hearkening back to my earlier story that I was a short story writer when I first started all this. Short stories, some of them can get extremely long. They're probably much, much shorter than the 8,000 you're going for. But the idea of having to convey a whole character, background and other stuff within a limited amount of space and really turn it over is something that some of the best writers have ever been. The short story writers have been able to accomplish. For example, Raymond Carver is one of the all-time greatest short story writers. And he was able to accomplish that oftentimes because he was a janitor at a high school, and so he would write during his lunch hour in his car, and that's why one of the reasons his stories are so short. But he was able to capture those people in small vignettes and make them so real in yet such a short amount of time. It's really a great skill and a fun project to take on, I bet.
Yeah, it's again, I'm a writer because I write things, but I'm not a writer because I'm professional in it, right? So and maybe look, I've got a book. I had a whole life as a spy and that kind of thing. So maybe there's some books there, but I still get to play with it and work out with it. And these, I'm saying 8,000 words. That's the long end of what we're allowed. But if I did it in 2K, then that'd be a short story. And so I'm not sure what will all end up there, but I can continue to go back and I could publish these short stories if I wanted to, or just not, or throw them up on the web and be like, short story, there you go.
Yeah,
it's an amazing time for creating, right? Like Substacking or Medium, any of that stuff.
A lot of freedom and a lot of different avenues. And like I said, lots of learning curves. Every time you turn around, there's something else to learn how to do, which is fun. Yeah. I mean, if you're actually a curious person and you kind of believe that things are going to happen the way they're supposed to, then the learning curves are easier to take. That's for sure.
Yeah. The book is called Ties That Blind. The character is Jake Fox, and Michael's got 2 of these books out. So I'm going to put the link. Oh, it's already up there. The link is right down there below. You guys know what I always say: buy 2 and buddy read. This is a great way to support a guy like Michael, and also look to do something fun with your friend, or give a gift and make it 3. I don't know, whatever. These books just aren't that expensive, and It's not me selling Kindle Unlimited, but it's free on Kindle Unlimited right now. So if you're on a Kindle, boy, that is a good way to do this. Are you going to slide over to audiobooks? Because if you want my attention, that is the best place to put a book.
100%. So the first book, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, is out on Audible and other platforms. So it is an audiobook. We're thinking about what to do with audiobooks for the series. That's a little bit different because you're not committing to one voice, one personality, one person for one book. You would like to find a voice personality that would buy off on and or animate the series. That would be somebody you could use over and over again. So that's taking a little bit more time to conceive and think through, but the audiobooks are amazing and definitely a market that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, I don't know the guy's name off the top of my head, but there's a guy that does the voice work for a lot of older baseball books about history because he's got a little bit of an East Coast New York accent, and I'm like, oh, there he is again. And so I got to get him on the show because he's built quite the little niche for himself. Maybe he's never going to be a millionaire. I don't know. Maybe he is a millionaire. But if you want to have a historic baseball real tale, then he's the guy that you get apparently, and it's amazing that industry has completely exploded where almost anybody can be an audio performer, that you can spend your time, take your little small steps like we were talking about and become someone, because there are so many books that are going to become available on audio. It's amazing. It's an amazing time for that kind of performer.
Yeah, I agree with that. It really is. And there's so many platforms where people could do that. And then, like you said, there are people that have followings. I have friends that they don't actually buy the author, they buy the narrator for long trips because they have big commutes. And then, like you said, there's some amazing talents. The one guy that did a lot of John Grisham's audiobooks was he came up through radio. So he was a radio actor first, then TV, and then later in life did the audiobooks. So it really is, like I said, you really want to find somebody that connects with the books, can project your characters, and hopefully you can work together to build a following not only for the book, but also for the narrator.
I listened to Lisa Marie Presley's, I guess you would call it an autobiography. It's not 100% that, because Riley Keough, her daughter, finished it up, right? And so in the audio, and this is why you get the audiobook. Yes, get the regular book, whatever. But when the words are written by Lisa Marie Presley, they're performed by who was it? Julia Roberts, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When Riley Keough speaks in the book, because she writes and fills and she kind of putties in what she needs to, she's the audio performer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a cool
And then when there was no text written and it's just audio recordings, Lisa Marie is the voice you hear.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. It's a very beautiful way to take not enough of a book and turn it into a full book and then have all this richness with the voices. And, I don't know if you listen to Bono, this book here, Surrender. I don't got to pull it down. But Bono's book, Surrender, he performs, and it is a fantastic, if you just listen for the quality of the audiobook, what is possible now with books, it's not just like a score. Like he sings a duet with his younger self in that book.
That's wow.
Impressive. Yeah, it's an amazing audio book. Yeah. So when you think about what's available in terms of, the voice and who's going to be Jake Fox or whatever, but also like what else could you do? Like even your original story about how you accidentally became a lawyer, that could become this almost like a stage play, but it's all audio, an audio play if you want.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's a great medium, and there are tons and tons of people that is the way they want to engage with story now, that's wonderful. I'm glad people are finding ways to get back into story, that it's not just television and movies. Not that those aren't great, not that those aren't amazing projects, but to go back and re-interact, if you will, with the written word is something that I think a lot of people could benefit from. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll say this because I don't want you to say it. If you've seen Cheers, then you don't need to watch Big Bang Theory and all these other shows. Like they're all formulas of the same formula, right? And so at some point, they're new, they're your generation, whatever. But there is something to be said about exploring a broad universe of books that TV can't, because TV is going to give you the same version of the same thing a lot. And you can just do better than that. Mix it up. There's some really creative things that aren't publishable on TV or movies that, you can just take bigger risks with a book and people will go with you on it.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Anything else you want to cover? I got a couple of things I can say, but it's not about me. It's about you. What else you want to cover before we wrap this thing up?
Well, I want to thank you. I mean, it's been a great hour. It didn't even feel like an hour. So it's been a great conversation. It's been a blessing to meet you. And I appreciate you promoting the books. That's very kind of you. And I'm excited to continue on the journey. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the next steps.
Me too. I love it. And definitely everybody, there's the link down below. Look in the remarks or in the show summary. You'll find the Amazon link. By the way, when you use that Amazon link, I get a little taste of that. Who cares about that? That's 4 or 5 cents. But here's the thing. You get that book to go with it. I'm actually going to buy the audiobook for your first book and get started in the James Fox series because I'll just listen to that while I walk around. All right. So thank you to you for coming on. I appreciate that. Your time is as valuable. And these are wonderful things. Hopefully you'll come back on when you have the next book out.
We'll love
for everybody watching, you're welcome. Then we're going to do it. And then everybody else watching, I'll see you all tomorrow.